Hi everyone, I've decided to do some YouTube videos to go along with my Instagram posts. If you're not aware, I have an Instagram account called Caleb's History Mysteries, so feel free to follow that. But yeah, I've decided it would be good to do some videos to go along with that. So one of the posts that I wanted to talk about today was a post I have about the sword and the stone, and what may have been the historical origin behind that. Because many people think, well, it's just a magical story, so there can't really be any historical basis for it, though there are some theories about it. So today I want to talk about one particular theory which I think is actually pretty convincing. So this theory is based on the fact that there's a record of King Edmund in, I think, the 10th century, if I remember correctly, talking to the clergy, and he says, "I have the sword of Constantine, but you have the sword of Peter." So sword in this context refers to authority. It's like a symbol of authority. So him referring to him having the sword of Constantine is like a way of him saying that he has political authority, whereas the clergy, having the sword of Peter, they have religious authority. So that makes sense, right? But what's interesting is that Peter, the name Peter means rock, or maybe you could translate it as stone. And the Catholic belief is that Peter was the rock upon which Jesus built the church, symbolically speaking. Because in the book of Matthew, Jesus says to Peter, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." And the name Peter does mean rock. So on that basis, someone having religious authority, in this context of King Edmund saying to the clergy, "You have the sword of Peter," someone having religious authority then could be described as having the sword of, well, you could translate it as the sword of the rock, or maybe the sword of the stone. So the reason this is so significant is because King Arthur didn't just, well, the earliest records about King Arthur indicate that he didn't just have this political authority as a king, but that his role as king involved a measure of religious authority as well. Because in one of the earliest records, well, the earliest definite record by Nennius, the Historia Brittonum, in the description of the 12 battles of Arthur, mention is made of Arthur carrying, I think in that account it's carrying the image of the Virgin Mary on his back, and then in a slightly later account in the Welsh Annals, mention is made of him carrying the cross on his back. So whether that's meant to be literal or whether that's just meant to be symbolic, I don't know, but in any case it shows that Arthur was viewed as having some kind of religious role in the kingdom as well, which makes sense because, for example, in ancient Rome, the emperors had the title Pontifex Maximus, which now is a title given to the popes, because that was representative of religious authority. So it makes sense that King Arthur may well have had a degree of religious authority incorporated into his role as king. So then if you think about that expression, that thought, that only the rightful king could possess the sword of the stone, or the sword from the stone, then that could quite easily be explained as being either a mistranslation or possibly an intentional use of symbolism of this idea of the sword of Peter, a representation of religious authority. So that could simply mean that in the 1200 or 1100s, when this story about the sword and the stone was first written, it could simply mean that the writer was trying to convey the idea, symbolically, through the story, that only the person who had the right to be king, the rightful heir to the throne, only they could possess the religious authority, because only the rightful king would have that religious authority. So that's a theory which I think makes the most amount of sense. Either an intentional mistranslation or either an intentional use of symbolism or a mistranslation, but somehow the sword in the stone was really the symbolic sword of Peter, a representation of religious authority that only the rightful king could possess. Hence why only Arthur could take the sword from the stone in the story. That's what I think is the most likely explanation to that story. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll also post a link in the description to an article that I wrote for a website, arthurlegends.com, where I go into this in a bit more detail, and also I cover a few other theories that have been given to explain the Sword in the Stone story, which I don't think are very convincing. So see my arguments there, and I'll also post a link to the Instagram post as well.